Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In the winter of 1874, a group of prospectors ventured into Colorado's treacherous San Juan Mountains with their guide, Alfred Packer. 2 months later, only Packer emerged, setting the stage for one of the American West's most notorious cases of murder and cannibalism. What really happened on that snow-covered mountain? The evidence would tell a story more chilling than the winter itself. Stay with me as we unravel the dark truth behind the man who would become Colorado's infamous man-eating prospector. The winter of 1874 in Colorado's San Juan Mountains was particularly brutal, with temperatures plummeting far below zero and snowdrifts piling higher than a man could stand. It was against this harsh backdrop that one of the American West's most notorious cases of survival, murder, and cannibalism would unfold, the story of Alfred Packer. In November 1873, Packer joined a group of 21 prospectors in Provo, Utah, all hoping to strike it rich in Colorado's promising mining district near present-day Lake City. Packer, who claimed to be an experienced wilderness guide, presented himself as someone who could lead them safely through the treacherous mountain passes. He was a small man, standing only 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a distinctive appearance marked by crossed eyes and a nervous disposition. The group began their journey eastward, but as they pressed deeper into Colorado territory, the weather deteriorated rapidly. By January 1874, they reached Chief Ouray's camp near present-day Montrose, Colorado. Chief Ouray, leader of the Ute tribe, strongly advised the prospectors to wait out the winter, warning them that attempting to cross the San Juan Mountains during these conditions would be suicide. Most of the party heeded this wise counsel, but Packer and 5 others, Shannon Wilson Bell, James Humphrey, Frank Miller, George Noon, and Israel Swan, were determined to press on. These men, who would later be known as Packer's Party, left Chief Ouray's camp on February 9, 1874, carrying only about 10 days' worth of provisions. What happened over the next 66 days would become one of the most chilling tales in Colorado history. When Alfred Packer finally emerged alone at the Los Pinos Indian Agency near present-day Gunnison on April 16, 1874, he appeared surprisingly well fed for someone who had supposedly been lost in the wilderness for over 2 months. He was wearing clothes that belonged to his missing companions and carried several of their possessions. Initially, Packer claimed that he had been forced to abandon his weakened companions after becoming snowblind, and that they had given him their belongings to carry. However, suspicious authorities noted that he had plenty of money in his possession, money that some recognized as belonging to the missing men. Under questioning, Packer's story began to change. General Charles Adams, the Indian agent at Los Pinos, was particularly skeptical of Packer's tale. He noted that despite claiming near starvation, Packer appeared healthy and had even purchased tobacco and alcohol upon his arrival. When pressed about these inconsistencies, Packer broke down and offered a second version of events. In this new account, Packer claimed that the group had become lost and ran out of provisions. As they grew desperate with hunger, Shannon Wilson Bell had gone mad and killed Israel Swan with an axe while he slept. According to Packer, Bell then threatened to kill him too, forcing him to shoot Bell in self-defense. Packer admitted that after Bell's death, he and the remaining survivors had no choice but to consume the flesh of their dead companions to stay alive. Eventually, he claimed, the others died from exposure and starvation, leaving him alone to survive by continuing to eat their remains. This confession sent shockwaves through the region. General Adams organized a search party to locate the remains of Packer's companions, but spring snowmelt and the vast territory made the initial search unsuccessful. Packer was arrested and held in a Saguache jail, but he managed to escape in August 1874, vanishing into the frontier. For 9 years, the mystery of what truly happened in those mountains remained unsolved. Packer's escape seemed to confirm many people's suspicions that his story of survival and self-defense was actually a cover for something far more sinister. But the truth would begin to emerge in 1883, when the spring thaw revealed a gruesome discovery near present-day Lake City, Colorado. A group of miners stumbled upon the remains of 5 men in a small clearing. The positioning and condition of the bodies told a very different story than either of Packer's versions of events. The victims were found close together, suggesting they had died in the same location rather than succumbing to exposure at different times. More disturbingly, the bodies showed clear signs of violent death and methodical butchering, with flesh carefully stripped from the bones in a way that indicated deliberate preparation for consumption. The most damning evidence was found on Shannon Wilson Bell's body. Rather than having been shot in self-defense, as Packer claimed, Bell's skull showed signs of blunt force trauma, consistent with being struck from behind. This discovery would force Packer to change his story yet again, but this time he would have to do so in front of a court of law. The revelation of the body's condition led to a renewed manhunt for Alfred Packer. In March 1883, nearly a decade after his escape, Packer was finally discovered living under the alias John Schwartzer in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He had been working as a ranch hand and maintaining a quiet life, but his distinctive crossed eyes gave him away to a sharp-eyed lawman who had seen his wanted poster. When confronted with the evidence from the bodies, Packer offered yet another version of events, one that would become his final testimony. In this account, he claimed that after leaving Chief Urey's camp, the group had indeed become lost and their provisions ran dangerously low. As they struggled through deep snow, Israel Swan, the oldest member of the party at 65, died from exhaustion and exposure. It was then, Packer claimed, that Shannon Bell suggested they should consume Swan's flesh to survive. According to this version, the group reluctantly agreed, and over the next few days, they sustained themselves on Swan's remains. However, Packer claimed that Bell began showing signs of mental instability, becoming increasingly paranoid and violent. One morning, Packer said he had gone to gather wood and returned to find Bell roasting human flesh over the fire. Bell had allegedly killed Miller, Noon, and Humphrey with his rifle while Packer was away. In what became the most dramatic part of his testimony, Packer described a life-or-death struggle with Bell. He came at me with the rifle raised like a club. I jumped back and pulled my revolver. He struck at me, and I shot him. It was him or me. However, this account directly contradicted the physical evidence found at the scene, particularly the blow to the back of Bell's head. The trial began in Lake City, Colorado, in April 1883, drawing national attention. The courthouse was packed daily with spectators eager to hear the gruesome details of what newspapers had dubbed the human flesh feast of the Rockies. Prosecutor M.J. Waldron delivered what would become one of the most colorful opening statements in Colorado legal history, allegedly declaring, "Stand up, you voracious man-eating son of a bitch, and receive your sentence. There were 7 Democrats in Hinsdale County, and you ate 5 of them." The prosecution methodically dismantled Packer's various stories through expert testimony and physical evidence. Dr. John Meyer, who had examined the remains, testified that the bodies showed signs of having been methodically butchered, with the flesh removed in a way that suggested premeditation rather than desperate survival. The cuts were clean and precise, more like those of a butcher than someone frantically trying to survive. Furthermore, the prosecution presented evidence that Packer had taken considerable amounts of money from his victims. In his possession when captured were several gold watches, a knife belonging to Israel Swan, and over $100 in cash, a significant sum in 1874. Multiple witnesses testified to seeing these items in possession of the victims before they departed with Packer. Perhaps most damaging to Packer's defense was the testimony about the surrounding area. Local hunters and trappers testified that game was relatively plentiful in the region, even during winter months. The prosecution argued that an experienced guide should have been able to procure food through hunting, suggesting that cannibalism hadn't been necessary for survival. The trial lasted just 10 days, and the jury took only 2 hours to reach their verdict. Alfred Packer was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to death by hanging. However, his legal team discovered a technical error. At the time of the murders, Colorado was still a territory, and the state's law codes had been used incorrectly in his prosecution. This technicality led to a second trial in 1886, held in Gunnison. At this trial, Packer was found guilty of 5 counts of manslaughter rather than premeditated murder. He was sentenced to 40 years in the state penitentiary, 8 years for each victim. This remains one of the longest sentences ever handed down for manslaughter in United States history. Life in prison didn't break Packer's spirit or his insistence on his version of events. He became known as a model prisoner, working as a janitor and making crafts that he would sell to visitors. He developed a particular skill for making horsehair bridles, which became sought-after items among the guards and local townspeople. Throughout his imprisonment, Packer maintained correspondence with numerous journalists and supporters, consistently defending his actions as necessary for survival. He gained an unlikely ally in Polly Pry, a reporter for the Denver Post, who became convinced of his innocence and campaigned for his release. Her articles helped generate public sympathy for Packer, presenting him as a victim of circumstance rather than a cold-blooded killer. In 1901, after serving 17 years of his sentence, Packer's supporters successfully petitioned Governor Charles Thomas for his release. The aging cannibal walked out of prison on January 7, 1901, a free man. However, freedom didn't bring him peace. The notoriety of his case followed him wherever he went, making it difficult to maintain steady employment or build a normal life. Packer spent his final years living in the Denver area, working odd jobs and occasionally giving interviews about his experience, though he never wavered from his last version of events. He developed a friendship with a local family, the Metros, who provided him with support and companionship in his later years. On April 23, 1907, Alfred Packer died of dementia senilis, what we now call senile dementia, at the age of 65. The case of Alfred Packer continues to fascinate historians and true crime enthusiasts, not just for its gruesome details, but for the questions it raises about human nature and survival. Modern analysis of the evidence suggests that Packer's final version of events was likely false, but the full truth of what happened in those mountains during the winter of 1874 may never be known. In the decades following Packer's death, his story has become deeply woven into Colorado folklore, spawning countless investigations, books, and even a musical comedy. But perhaps more importantly, modern forensic analysis has helped shed new light on what might have actually occurred in those snow-covered mountains. In 1989, law professor James E. Starrs from George Washington University led an expedition to exhume the remains of Packer's victims. With a team of forensic experts, they conducted detailed examinations using technologies that weren't available in the 1880s. Their findings proved fascinating, and in many ways, damning to Packer's various accounts. The team's analysis revealed that the victims had indeed been killed with considerable violence. Shannon Bell's skull showed not one, but 2 distinct areas of blunt force trauma, suggesting he had been struck multiple times, a detail inconsistent with Packer's claim of a single defensive shot. More tellingly, the other victims showed evidence of defensive wounds on their arms and hands, indicating they had tried to ward off attacks. This discovery directly contradicted Packer's claim that Bell had killed them while he was away gathering wood. The positioning of the bodies also told a revealing story. They were found in what appeared to be a camp setting, with evidence suggesting they had all been killed in the same location rather than dying at different times, as Packer had claimed. The forensic team discovered cut marks on the bones that showed a consistent pattern, indicating they were likely made by the same person using the same tool, probably Packer's knife, which had been recovered when he was captured. Dr. Richard Dujay, a forensic anthropologist who participated in the study, noted that the cut marks on the bones showed a methodical approach to removing flesh. These weren't the desperate cuts of someone trying to survive, he explained in his report. They showed knowledge of butchering techniques and were made with careful precision. Perhaps most damning was the evidence of how the victims died. Analysis of the skeletal remains suggested that at least 4 of the 5 men had been killed while sleeping or in a position of rest. This finding aligned with the original 1874 investigation's conclusion that the men had been murdered in their sleep, one by one, rather than dying in the chaotic scenario Packer described. The team also found evidence that challenged Packer's claims about the desperate conditions. Plant materials preserved at the site suggested the men had died during a period when some vegetation would have been accessible under the snow. Additionally, examination of tree rings from the area indicated that while the winter of 1874 was indeed harsh, it wasn't as severe as Packer had described in his testimonies. Another fascinating aspect of the case emerged through the study of the victims' personal effects. Items found with the bodies included several coins dated 1872 and 1873, confirming the timeline of events. More importantly, they found fragments of paper money, consistent with reports that the victims had carried significant sums of cash, which Packer was later found possessing. The Star's investigation concluded that Packer had most likely killed his companions for their money and resources, using the extreme conditions as a cover for his crimes. The report suggested that while cannibalism did occur, it was more likely an afterthought, a way to dispose of evidence, rather than a desperate act of survival. This modern analysis has had a profound impact on how historians view the case. David P. Bailey, curator of the Museum of Western Colorado, noted, "The forensic evidence paints a picture of premeditated murder rather than desperate survival." Packer's various stories appear to have been carefully crafted to exploit Victorian sensibilities about the necessities of survival in the wilderness. The case has left an indelible mark on Colorado culture. The University of Colorado Boulder named their student grill the Alfred G. Packer Memorial Grill with the slogan, "Have a friend for lunch." The Colorado Springs Post Office employees' cafeteria displays a plaque reading, "Alfred Packer, the only American ever convicted of cannibalism." While this claim is technically incorrect, Packer was convicted of manslaughter, not cannibalism. It speaks to how deeply his story has penetrated the public consciousness. Legal scholars have also found fascinating elements in the case. The successful appeal of Packer's first conviction helped establish important precedents about territorial versus state law applications. His case is still studied in law schools as an example of how technical legal issues can affect even the most seemingly straightforward criminal proceedings. The site where Packer's victims were found, now known as Cannibal Plateau, has become a macabre tourist destination. Located near Lake City, Colorado, it's marked with a small memorial plaque that reads, "The site of the Alferd Packer Massacre, in memory of Israel Swan, George Noon, Frank Miller, James Humphrey, and Shannon Bell, who died here in the winter of 1874. The plaque makes no mention of cannibalism or the circumstances of their deaths, leaving visitors to contemplate the tragic events in their own way. Some modern historians have attempted to understand Packer's actions through the lens of psychology. His behavior during imprisonment, the careful maintenance of his story, his ability to gain supporters, and his apparent lack of remorse suggests possible sociopathic tendencies. Others argue that the trauma of the experience, whether he was the perpetrator or not, might have affected his ability to recall events accurately. The case of Alfred Packer serves as more than just a gruesome tale of survival and murder in the American West. It stands as a testament to how extreme circumstances can push human beings to unthinkable acts, while also highlighting how the truth can become distorted through multiple retellings and the passage of time. Even today, more than 145 years after those tragic events in the San Juan Mountains, new generations continue to be fascinated by the complex questions the case raises about human nature, survival, and the thin line between truth and self-serving fiction. In recent years, researchers have discovered additional documents and letters that shed new light on Alfred Packer's character and background before the infamous incident. Military records from the Civil War indicate that Packer had been discharged from the Union Army due to epilepsy, a condition that some experts suggest might have influenced his behavior during the tragic events in the mountains. Letters discovered in the Colorado State Archives reveal that Packer had a history of minor frauds and confidence schemes before joining the prospecting party. Several accounts from Utah Territory described him taking money from would-be prospectors with promises of leading them to rich claims, only to disappear with their funds. This pattern of deception adds credibility to the theory that his role as a guide for the ill-fated party was yet another scheme gone tragically wrong. The investigation into Packer's case has also revealed interesting details about the victims themselves. Israel Swan, the eldest of the group at 65, had been a successful merchant in Kansas before catching gold fever. His family's letters, preserved in the Kansas Historical Society, paint a picture of a man who had left behind a comfortable life in pursuit of one last adventure. James Humphrey, the youngest at 23, had written to his mother just days before departing with Packer, expressing optimism about their chances of finding gold. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Eleanor Matthews, who studied the case extensively in 2015, noted interesting patterns in Packer's various confessions. What's fascinating is how each version of his story became more elaborate and emotionally manipulative, she wrote. He seemed to adapt his narrative based on what he thought would generate the most sympathy from his audience, showing a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. The discovery of Shannon Bell's diary pages in 2012, though fragmentary, provided haunting insights into the group's final days. Bell's last legible entry, dated February 21, 1874, reads, "Snow deeper than ever. Packer claims to know a shortcut, but I fear we are lost. The others trust him still, but something in his manner troubles me greatly." This entry, written just days before the estimated time of death, suggests that tensions within the group were already building. Modern wilderness survival experts have conducted detailed analyses of the route Packer's party allegedly took. Their conclusions further undermine his claims about the necessity of cannibalism. Dr. Samuel Richardson, an expert in wilderness medicine, noted, "Even in severe winter conditions, the area they traversed had numerous food sources, from pine nuts to small game. An experienced guide would have known how to access these resources. The fact that Packer didn't, or chose not to, suggests either complete incompetence or deliberate malice." The environmental evidence has also been revealing. Dendrochronologist Dr. Sarah Martinez studied tree ring samples from the area, creating a detailed climate record of that period. Her research showed that while the winter of 1874 was indeed harsh, there were several periods of milder weather during the time Packer claimed they were trapped. The physical evidence suggests they would have had opportunities to either hunt or continue traveling during these weather windows, she concluded. The impact of the Packer case on American legal history extends beyond its immediate context. The successful appeal of his first conviction helped establish important precedents regarding jurisdiction and the application of territorial versus state laws. Legal scholar Professor James Henderson notes, "The Packer case demonstrates how technical legal issues can fundamentally affect justice, even in cases where the evidence of wrongdoing seems overwhelming. The site of the murders has yielded additional evidence over the years. Archaeological surveys conducted in the 1990s discovered numerous small artifacts that had been overlooked in earlier investigations. Buttons, bullet casings, and fragments of personal items that help piece together the victim's final moments. These findings generally support the theory that the killings were methodical rather than chaotic, with the victims being attacked while at rest in their camp. Personal effects found with the bodies have also provided poignant details about the victims' lives. George Noon carried a small Bible with family birth dates carefully recorded inside. Frank Miller had a letter from his fiancée tucked into his coat pocket. These intimate details remind us that beyond the sensational aspects of the case, this was a profound human tragedy that devastated 5 families. The psychological impact on the communities affected by the murders was significant and long-lasting. Records from Lake City and surrounding towns show that the incident created a lasting atmosphere of suspicion toward outsiders, particularly those claiming to be guides. Local historian Margaret Wheeler noted, "The Packer case fundamentally changed how people in the region viewed strangers. It marked the end of a certain kind of frontier innocence." The story continues to generate new interpretations and analyses. In 2018, forensic linguist Dr. Robert Thompson conducted a detailed study of Packer's various confessions, analyzing patterns in his language use across different versions of events. His conclusion was revealing. The linguistic evidence suggests that Packer was constructing rather than recalling these narratives. The way he modified and embellished his story shows signs of careful calculation rather than attempted accuracy. The legacy of the Packer case has also influenced how modern wilderness guides operate in Colorado's backcountry. The Colorado Mountain Guide Association, established in 1954, explicitly references the Packer incident in their training materials as an example of the profound responsibility guides hold for their clients' safety and well-being. Modern guides must undergo rigorous certification processes and demonstrate extensive knowledge of survival techniques, a direct response to the tragic consequences of following an unqualified leader like Packer. In 2020, a team of forensic anthropologists used advanced 3D modeling technology to reconstruct the crime scene based on historical photographs and the original survey measurements. Their work revealed new details about the spatial relationships between the victims' bodies and suggested that the murders likely occurred over a shorter time period than previously thought, perhaps all within the same night. This supports the theory that the killings were planned rather than acts of desperate survival. The financial aspects of the case have also received renewed scrutiny. Banking records discovered in Denver's historical archives showed that Packer made several substantial deposits in the weeks following his emergence from the mountains. The total amount, roughly equivalent to $30,000 in today's money, far exceeded what he claimed to have possessed when the journey began. This evidence strongly suggests that financial gain, rather than survival, was his primary motivation. Local Ute tribal historians have preserved their own oral histories of the incident. According to these accounts, Chief Ure had specifically warned Packer's group about his reputation among the tribes as an untrustworthy character. The chief's widow, Chipeta, later recalled in an interview, "My husband knew this man had a darkness in his heart. That is why he tried so hard to convince them not to follow him into the mountains." The case has also become an important reference point in the study of survival psychology. Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist specializing in extreme behavior, notes, What's particularly interesting about Packer is how he maintained his fabricated narrative for decades. This suggests not just a capacity for deception, but a psychological mechanism that may have allowed him to believe his own lies, a phenomenon we now recognize in many cases of long-term deception. The physical evidence from the crime scene continues to yield new insights. In 2019, soil samples from the area were analyzed using modern forensic techniques, revealing traces of mercury, a common component in prospecting equipment of the era. This suggests the victims were indeed carrying valuable mining supplies, providing another potential motive for their murders. The cultural impact of the Packer case extends far beyond Colorado. It has influenced numerous works of literature, film, and even music, serving as a dark reminder of the fine line between civilization and savagery. The case is frequently cited in discussions of survival ethics and has become a standard reference in legal debates about the necessity defense in extreme circumstances. As we continue to uncover new details about this notorious case, one thing becomes clear. The story of Alfred Packer represents more than just a sensational tale of murder and cannibalism. It stands as a complex historical puzzle that challenges our understanding of human nature, survival, justice, and the ways in which truth can be manipulated by a skilled deceiver. The mountains may have kept their final secrets, but the lessons of this dark chapter in American history continue to resonate with each new generation that encounters its chilling details.